your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Hello, thanks for joining us for our week in review. With the Liberal government suspending the COVID-19 vaccine mandates for domestic and international travelers, the Alberta government this week also removed some remaining restrictions like wearing masks on public transit and mandatory isolation. Isolation will now be just a recommendation. Officials say masking in Alberta Health Services and contracted health facilities will shift to organizational policy. As for individual municipalities, most are following just directions from the province. Here's what the officials at the City of Lethbridge had to say.
Well, the city, we rely on the province for anything really related to health, and so with the announcement, we believe in the province's chief medical officer and the decisions they make. So we've been following suit all along with the COVID restrictions and what's been in place. We won't be requiring proof of vaccination for employees that are being hired. On the transit buses, masks will no longer be required. So pretty much, I believe in stage 3, the province outlines it quite well on their website and the news releases. Pretty much it's back to pre-COVID conditions now.
And speaking of the pandemic, one candidate throwing her hat in the race for Alberta's premier says she'd like to launch an independent public inquiry into Alberta's handling of COVID-19. Rajan Sawhney, Alberta's former transportation minister, announced that she'll be seeking the leadership of the province's United Conservative Party. She says she decided to run to move Alberta forward. Sawhney says if she were to become premier, she'd get to the bottom of how the pandemic was handled by the province.
What was not done right was the fact that there were a number of communities all across Alberta who felt that their voices weren't heard, that they weren't consulted, that they didn't have enough information about how decisions were made. We don't need more of the same. We don't need more of the same folks who have been in the internal cabinet making decisions. It's time for a change.
She says this inquiry would look at ways to support Albertans financially and offer more support for those struggling with mental health issues. Sawhney joins a long list of candidates who are seeking the leadership, including former Finance Minister Travis Toews, former Wildrose Party leaders Danielle Smith, and MLA Brian Jean. There's also word now that Children's Services Minister Rebecca Schultz may be stepping aside from her portfolio and gunning for that leadership position as well. And Calgary Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner says she's seriously considering becoming Alberta's newest premier. Rempel-Garner made the announcement via Twitter. She was serving as co-chair on Patrick Brown's leadership campaign when Kenny announced that he was resigning as premier and leader of the party after narrowly surviving a leadership review with just over 51% support. The new party leader and premier will be chosen on October the 6th. Many of us here in Alberta have been wondering where those utility rebates are. The province said a few months ago that we would be receiving help with our natural gas and electricity bills as inflation has made life so much more difficult. We asked UCP caucus chair and Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Neudorf if the checks are in the mail.
The electricity rebates will be applied directly to each individual's bill. So they won't see a check in the mail, but they should see that rebate of $50 a month over 3 months on their bill. And that should be starting as soon as July. It might take a little bit of time. There's a lot of electricity users across the province, but that's the start date for that. And the natural gas rebates are slated to begin in October.
And Alberta's NDP again asked when those energy rebates will be kicking in. Energy critic Kathleen Gainley says the delay in helping Albertans has created a lot of anxiety for many families. It has also created an opportunity for scammers.
But this delay and lack of public communication has also opened the door to bad actors. Last week, across the province, we saw reports of families who were targeted by text scams. Albertans are receiving texts to remind them of the UCP program and invite them to click on a link to claim their $150 rebate from the Canada Revenue Agency. I want to say this clearly and publicly. This is a scam. Albertans will not be receiving a rebate over text, and your government has stated that these rebates will arrive directly on your bill, not through the CRA.
Coming up after the break, we take a look at what's going on in Alberta courts. Plus, our legislative correspondent is back to chat about the UCP leadership and allegations of bullying within Rachel Notley's NDP. Stay with us. Four men accused of conspiracy to commit murder near the Coutts border blockade had their cases adjourned by a Lethbridge judge. The cases have moved to next month because one of the four accused, Chris Carbert, has hired a new lawyer who needs to get up to speed on the file before the matter can be moved forward in court. The cases involving Christopher Lysak, Chris Carbert, Anthony Olnick, and Jerry Morin will be back in court on July 11th. A 26-year-old woman from Medicine Hat who was charged with first-degree murder and indignity to human remains in connection with the discovery of a body outside Pincher Creek received a decision on her bail application. BCN's Naveen Day has been following this story and provided us with an update last Monday.
Justice D.K. Miller denied Melissa Martins-Lagasse's bail application earlier today, saying that she failed to meet the onus for release on 3 grounds. Now, due to a publication ban, we cannot go into details about the evidence given, submissions made, or reasons behind the judge's decision. Martins-Lagasse was arrested and charged on November 23rd of last year after being considered a suspect after the remains of 34-year-old Megan Ekma were discovered a few days earlier outside of the town of Pincher Creek. The judge also prohibited Martins-Lagasse from communicating with one of the witnesses. Martins-Lagasse's next scheduled court appearance by CCTV is set for July 11th.
Thanks so much for that, Naveen. Well, you may remember back to 2013 when Jason Klaus and Joshua Frank were each convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder after the bodies of Klaus's father and sister were discovered in their burnt-out farmhouse near Red Deer, Alberta. The mother's body was never recovered. Fast forward to 2021, and the Alberta court imposed consecutive parole eligibility for Klaus and Frank of 50 years in prison before they could apply for release. This was then taken to the Supreme Court of Canada, and last month, the Supreme Court struck down the federal law that allowed these consecutive parole eligibilities. This week, the justices of our top court called this federal rule unconstitutional and cruel. As a result, the case of the 2 men convicted in the slayings of the 3 family members was sent back to Alberta Court of Appeal. Well, Legal Aid Alberta says that they're seeing more and more emergency protection orders pop up on their desks every day. There's been a 17% increase since 2018, and this puts a strain on the legal system as they're dealing with about 100 calls daily. A lawyer with the Legal Aid says that they're finding a lot of the orders are filed by women.
Vast majority of the EPOs that we see before our courts are applied for by women. Police may also apply on behalf of a victim. We want it to stop. And how it stops is a fundamental question that I think what we all need as Albertans, we all need to think about and answer that question, to be vigilant, to know that this is sometimes a crime, it's a civil matter before the court, and it's happening behind closed doors.
Riddoch says the increased incidents of violence have been attributed to the financial strain of a job loss and the higher cost of living. The Alberta government is forecasting the current expansion plans for existing oil sands plants are expected to bump up Alberta production by 27% over the next 10 years. Alberta Energy Regulator expects oil sands output to increase to 4.7 million barrels per day by 2031 from the 3.7 million barrels per day produced right now. Export sales from Alberta are forecast to reach 4.5 million barrels per day in less than 10 years as oil sands exports to the U.S. and overseas markets will continue to grow. As you've seen, there's a lot of speculation on who will be running for the leadership of the UCP. Well, coming up, our legislative reporter discusses 2 possibilities for the early frontrunners. Have a look.
I talked to a lot of people in the last month or so who said this is a challenging time for the party, but it's also a really exciting time for the party. You get to see competing visions of what it should be, to fire up the grassroots, fire up the base, talk about politics and policy and all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be an interesting few months here until we decide, or until we see who the next leader is.
After the break, Hal Roberts and Tyler Dawson talk about the allegations of the Alberta NDP bullying their volunteers.
It feels like we just went through this a couple months ago with the United Conservatives. Sounds like the exact same sort of thing, centralized sort of party power dictating to the grassroots members, which it's a much bigger problem, I think, probably in Canadian politics across the entire board. But it does show that there's a little bit of drama within the NDP. And the reason that that's sort of important is because the NDP has portrayed itself as being, a very tight ship, very well captained, no drama, government in waiting, not dealing with infighting like the United Conservatives have been for the past couple years.
Welcome back. There have been allegations this past week that Rachel Notley's Alberta NDP are dealing with some controversy of bullying. A recent story by the Canadian Press says elite staffers have been disrespecting volunteers, grassroots members, and constituency associations presidents.
Tyler, where have we heard this before?
I know, it feels like we just went through this a couple months ago with the United Conservatives. Sounds like the exact same sort of thing, centralized sort of party power dictating to the grassroots members, which it's a much bigger problem, I think, probably in Canadian politics across the entire board. But it does show that there's a little bit of drama within the NDP. And the reason that that's sort of important is because the NDP has portrayed itself as being, a very tight ship, very well captained, no drama, government in waiting, not dealing with infighting like the United Conservatives have been for the past couple years. This shows that the ship maybe has a couple leaks in it, and we're not talking mass revolt like we were with the UCP, but there is a whiff of scandal here, and there's been demands for an investigation into it to see what's going on. So something else to keep an eye on, I think, because as I said, election in less than a year, and every single one of these sorts of stories matters, I think, to parties when a vote's coming up.
If this actually blows up into something even bigger, do you think this could potentially lead to Rachel Notley resigning as leader of the NDP?
I have a hard time imagining they will dump Rachel Notley before the next election. I think she's done a pretty good job. I think most everyone in the NDP thinks she's done a good job. There isn't an obvious person to step in immediately and fill those shoes, I don't think. So I wouldn't say it's not possible. Anything's possible in politics, especially in Alberta politics. But I just can't see that happening, I don't think, unless it gets really, really, really bad.
Tyler, it's not just the UCP which is getting a new leader, but the Alberta Liberal Party is as well.
Yeah, who knew? They're going to have a leadership vote in September, I think it is. The interim leader's been in since last March, and he's going to be stepping down. So they're going to be looking for someone new. Who's going to want to fill those shoes? I have no idea. It's strange to think that a decade ago, the Alberta Liberal Party was, a somewhat influential political party, and haven't had a seat in the legislature in some time. So who knows? Maybe this election, maybe there's some space in the middle of Alberta politics right now for the Alberta Liberals to make a bit of a comeback. So, I think it's worth keeping an eye on some of those smaller parties.
Tyler, let's chat a bit about Bill 17, which recently passed at the legislature. It updated some labor law provisions. Can you talk about its true significance?
Well, it doesn't seem to have gotten all that much attention, but the big thing that this did was created bereavement leave for people whose pregnancy ends in something other than a live birth. So the case of a miscarriage, stillbirth, or abortion, perhaps, they can get paid time off work for bereavement. And this is, I think a small but significant sort of legislative development, because I think at this point we all know someone who's gone through one of those experiences, and it's tough and it's hard, and to be able to take a few paid days off work to grieve that and to sort of deal with what comes next, I think is probably the sort of change that's really going to affect a lot of people. So as I say, it hasn't got a whole ton of notice, and of course it is sort of a labor law sort of provision. You see the sort of the title of it and go, labor law update or whatever. But it is the sort of small government change that actually is going to affect the lives of a lot of people, I think.
Now, Tyler, government officials here in the province are not happy. They're upset that Ottawa's looking at having producers put a potential warning label on ground beef, pork, veal, and lamb. Now, the label from Health Canada would warn that food contains more than, 15% of daily fat, sodium, sugar, or saturated fat?
Right. And so obviously with ground meat, I believe it is the fat that is at issue here. If the label comes in, this could lead to some sort of changes in the grocery store, as grocery stores don't want to have warning label food on their shelves. So more lean meats might be what you're seeing on shelves. But the Alberta government has hit back on this, saying that it's, sort of a ludicrous proposal, that this sort of thing is supposed to be for processed food, not whole foods that are just meats or whatever. And of course, so they want an exemption for it. And so do some of the producers, because there are exemptions for other things. There's exemptions for dairy and eggs, for example, which are also kind of high in fat. So a little bit of a double standard thing going on there, maybe. It's just an easy political win for the Alberta government and for the Saskatchewan government too, that is sort of getting in on this. Very easy political win to fight back against warning labels on meat that is part of the second largest industry in the province. So, I think we'll probably hear more about that in the days ahead. And honestly, wouldn't totally surprise me if we saw the federal government back down a little bit on that.
My mother always used to tell me, eat the animal fat too, son. Not only is it tasty, but it's good for your body. So the Ottawa's trying to tell me that my mama's wrong? I don't think so. Mama's never wrong here.
After the break, Albertans are ready for summer and the wagons and horses are Alberta bound. We'll be right back. Welcome back. The summer weather of 2022 is upon us, and most of us are looking forward to all the activities the season brings, including the midways and rodeos. When we hear the word stampede, we think Calgary, but Medicine Hat also has one, and it kicks off the end of July. But this weekend, the Hat is holding their signature kickoffs to summer event. Tim Weinberger of the Medicine Hat Exhibition and Stampede tells us all about the chuck wagon races and how the summer is shaping up for southeastern Alberta. Take a look. But before we get into the excitement of the summer events of Medicine Hat, can you maybe give us a snapshot of the history of the exhibition and Stampede in the Hat?
Well, the organization itself actually dates back to 1887. I had to write that down because I keep saying 1987. No, it's 1887. And in fact, you referenced the Calgary Stampede. Medicine Hat can actually brag the fact that our rodeo is older than Calgary. So we've been around for a long, long time.
That's amazing. I had no idea it was that old as well. Okay, so Tim, now of course that the pandemic is seemingly over, I would suspect that more people will be out this year. So what can people expect to find if they're attending the Stampede for, say, the first time?
Well, the Stampede is back full on. Our motto this year is "We Ride Again." Everything's back: night shows, exhibition, the CFR rodeo. The night shows this year are going to be fantastic. Every year that we do a show, we want to make sure that it's bigger and better than last year. And this year, with the circumstances of the last 2 years, are no exception. We want to make it bigger, better, more fun, more entertaining. Lots of great family free entertainment. There'll be a lot of things to do and a lot of good things to see.
So, Tim, we have the chuck wagon races, right? And then we have the Stampede. So, two different events is my understanding. And are these chuck wagon races essentially the big kickoff event of the summer?
Yeah, they are essentially the first event of summer. We do have a spring rodeo that runs in late March. And the chuck wagons kick us off for the summer season. So that's over the next, it's a 4-day event, the 16th to the 19th. We're looking good for attendance, and the chuck wagon, all the drivers have been in town for a couple of days, and they're getting practiced up and ready to go. And then in July, well, of course, we start with Canada Day being a big day for us on the grounds here, and then the week of the 25th of July is Stampede and Exhibition, so that's the rodeo and the night shows.
This must have a big financial impact on the city of Medicine Hat. How well does the chuck wagon races and the Stampede do for the Hat?
combined or individually, I don't have a number I can give you, but I can tell you it's huge. We've talked to business people, restaurants, hotels, the people that come to watch, staying in the hotels, shopping, spending money, enjoying our events, but spending money in the city. It's as I say, I couldn't give you an exact number, but the only description I would say is huge.
There's also some other history displays on the property, isn't that right? Is
Yes,
there
yes.
the Pioneer Village, for example? What can you tell us
Oh yeah,
about that?
thank you. Yeah. Village is actually a very interesting little park. We've got buildings of probably every time in the last century. From the old schoolhouse, the old general store, the old gas station, and it's quite an educational place. We host a lot of school tours there, and kids coming through and looking at some of the buildings and the way we old people used to do it. It's kind of fun. It's kind of historical, and we've actually looking at some opportunities with one or two partners to kind of take claim to it as a presenting sponsor. I can't really get into those details right now, but we'll have some sponsorship with that, which will only make it bigger and better and grow even more.
Before we go, how can our viewers find out more about what's happening this summer at the Medicine Hat exhibition in Stampede?
Well, go right to the website. That seems to be the way to get all your information these days. It's mhstampede.com.
When we return, we take a look at the latest local stories from around our area that made headlines this week. Keep it right here.
Meanwhile, the people in town that come over where the mine was, it's just all rocks. And they go, oh, they're dead. So they kind of made a token effort to try and get in, but they didn't really.
Welcome back. Grasshoppers can be a nuisance, especially for many of our farmers and ranchers. When it's hot and dry here in southern Alberta, we tend to see a lot of them. The more we see, the more it creates an infestation scenario. A professor with the University of Lethbridge says since agricultural insecticides are not allowed to be used within city limits, the best thing a homeowner can use to limit the number of grasshoppers on your property is water.
Continuous watering with a sprinkler will hold them down so that at least they're not moving and eating very much. If it's a very small place, you could vacuum and confine and control them that way. But there really aren't very many spray solutions that you could use in a city that would hold grasshoppers down. That's a big problem, and that it would be nice if that was changed, so there was something that could be used.
Well, a new exhibition at the Galt Museum and Archives is showcasing the history of local transit here in our city. The exhibition is called Ticket to Ride. Micah Quinn has more on the interesting transit artifacts from past to present.
Seeing that gnarly old track with its historic dust and rust.
The curator of the Galt Museum, Tyler Stewart, says the Ticket to Ride exhibition features a piece of the old streetcar track that was dug up in 2020 from 3rd Avenue South in Lethbridge.
In the next month or so, there will be another art exhibition at Casa, which will use some of that streetcar rail. Some artists are using those for public art pieces as well. So I think it's a cool topic that goes kind of across the city and across different organizations in interesting ways.
Public transit was installed in our city in 1912, which consisted of a streetcar system of only 12 cars. It carried over 47 million people until 1947, when it was phased out and buses became the new method of transportation for users. One of the unique parts of the exhibition highlights the personal collection of transit items from Lethbridge's first female bus driver, who started in 1974.
We were really fortunate to tell the story of Marriott Morose, and very grateful to her family, to her son Jeff Morose and her granddaughter Maggie Hemsing, who lent us some of the cool objects from her career as a transit operator. That story is really important to show how it's important to be be equitable within employment in the public sector, and that public service of transit is an important one for a lot of people.
The Ticket to Ride exhibition will be showcased at the Galt Museum and Archives until September 4th. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Thanks, Micah. Canada's deadliest rock slide took place 119 years ago, right here in southern Alberta. Frank Slide showcases the catastrophic damage that was caused when limestone rocks rained it down on the community of Frank. As video journalist Micah Quinn explains, the slide has a very rich history.
The real cause of the Frank slide was the internal structure of Turtle Mountain, which is a mountain that fell down on part of the town back in 1903.
That's according to the facility supervisor for the Frank Slide Interpretive Center, Joey Ambrosi. In the early morning hours of April 29, 1903, the small community of Frank had 110 million tons of limestone rock crash down onto its sleeping residents. The area housed 600 people, and more than 90 were killed during the rock slide.
After the slide came down, the coal mine got blamed for the rock slide coming down. But scientists today, even back then, they said that coal mining was a contributing factor, but not the factor that set it off. It was the internal structure, and then the freezing and thawing on the night the slide came down was the reason it came down on that night.
A total of 17 miners were trapped during the slide, and after 12 to 13 hours of digging their way through coal, they were able to get out.
Meanwhile, the people in town that come over where the mine was, it's just all rocks. And they go, oh, they're dead. So they kind of made a token effort to try and get in, but they didn't really. But 13 hours later, the men popped out of this little hole above and they looked down and they saw all this destruction, but they were safe. So the people in town were very excited that these people survived.
The slide was so loud, it was said that people from as far away as Cochrane and Calgary could hear it. Scientists say another rock slide from Turtle Mountain is unlikely to happen in our lifetime.
And what they think, after looking all of this data, is South Peak will come down, but probably in the next few thousand years. And it likely won't come down as one piece. It'll come down as 4 or 5 good-sized pieces that will only come partway down the mountain.
To put the rock slide into perspective, it's said that you can build a wall 1 meter wide and 6 meters high from Victoria, British Columbia to Halifax, Nova Scotia using the rocks that fell from Turtle Mountain. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
That's some informative stuff there. Well, we need to take a short break, but when we come back, well, it'll be almost time for our summer camp. Hal Roberts chatted with Tanya Martins of Southern Alberta Bible Camp to see what's up with the camp for this year. Stay with us.